Introduce our speaker for today. Joy Sagar is an internationally recognized spiritual medium, psychic, healer, speaker, and teacher. Born in India, he began exploring his intuitive gifts at a young age, and he later trained extensively with the Southern Cassadaga Spiritualist Camp Meeting Association, earning certifications as a medium and healer in 2013. Joy is based here as a resident in Cassadaga and sees clients here in the camp. He offers personal readings, workshops, and public demonstration, and his mission is to inspire growth, healing, and a more profound connection with spirit through compassion, integrity, and wisdom. Please help me in welcoming Joy Sagar to the platform.
Thank you, Jamie, for your wonderful voice, singing, and the introduction. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to see you. How about you? I have a little sense of humor. Sometimes it shows up awkwardly, but laugh anyways. So, I was asked what songs I want, and all my pointer was to pick something from the hymnal. And this hymn, isn't it appropriately placed? Whatever inspired Jamie to bring this placement of this hymn, I feel it is a beautiful connection to the time that we're in, because let alone controlling anything else, we can only manage and control ourselves. So I hope we all know where the on and high note of our lights are, because I feel that is very much needed in our world today. And I feel that light can be contagious like anything else. So if you're spreading from your authenticity, it will take us where we need to be. That being said, we'll come back to the part of the message that I feel I'm inspired to share. And all I'm wanting you to just do is, if you could just take a brief moment to look around in this room, you will only come to realize that we are many different shapes and sizes. We're coming from many different backdrops, upbringings, even religious upbringing, so we are just a mixed bag of presence here. And I do feel the part of my inspiration is to understand that backdrop, that when times are moving, the time is also moving us. So we'll just work with some of these aspects from different culture, different backgrounds, different belief systems, and even different exploration, because what made you end up in this space today is accumulation of a lot of crossroads or cross points. I know we all have a story, and it is authentic to us because it is our story. And there's no need to modify or alter or change it, because we understand that story from our perspective. And that perspective itself is a beautiful vantage point. So this expectation of understanding or wanting everybody to see the same perspective sometimes doesn't go so well. But we still cannot dismiss our own perspective, because that's where we are. And that's the point, what I'm wanting to say, because as I look back to my inspiration for today, what am I doing here? That question rises within me time to time. And just like everybody else in this room and out in the world there, I'm still trying to figure that out. But it definitely took me to the pursuit of our precepts of science, philosophy, and religion of spiritualism. What about me in this journey? And vice versa, because it works both ways. And as I was looking at that, I'm going into the early 1800s and breaking this into 3 and maybe 4 parts. So in the 1800s, there was industrialization. Families were looking for better prospects, better paying jobs. So there were splits happening in the family because of the resources or progressiveness or whatever the late intent was at that time. So the families were splitting, and sometimes these splits were taking people way too far from each other from a family's perspective. There was also a lot of sickness happening at that time that was coming upon very quickly and taking life very quickly. So that is also a backdrop of that time period in that era in the early 1800s. There's also a sense with that is the question was coming up because there were also wars, time periods were touching upon that timeline, and there was a lot of life lost in those pursuits as well. And there were not many closures. There were not many answers why this is happening or why what is going on. So spiritualism in that fold has been profoundly understood to help through the grief. And it has always has been that backdrop of I'm feeling the grief. Sometimes I'm not sure how to work with it. Sometimes I do not know how to go about it. So there were a lot of families and souls, living souls, were reaching out for answers, or how somebody is doing on the other side because there was no closure. So the gift of mediumship, the gift of healing through the healing medium, was to bring that communication close or bring those closures. Or there have been some accountings in the historical values where the mediums have helped find their lost loved one, where they were, where they ended up. So there's a lot of discovery that went on through those backdrops of our time period. The construct of that part is, what happens when we die. That is the early 1800 parts, is what's going on. And through the mediumship, through sitting in the power and developing the communication link with those that have passed on, has always been an inspiration to see and explore what is going on. And once again, like we were talking about perspective, every medium, I believe, still has their own perspective, because the skill, the muscle of mediumship is just as exclusive as our DNA is. It works and stretches in its own methodology, and it's hard to say do this and it's always going to work out this way. It doesn't work that way sometimes, or at least in my experience. So regardless of the religious background or the backdrop of economics, any time, any life-turning eras and time periods have happened, it hasn't opened the door for what's going on. So that question moves into the second era, where I believe a lot of exploration was happening. So the first era was the communicating with the other side, establishing the link. The second era happened right around the time of our modern day spiritualism in 1848, where we have very well documented history of spiritualism, the peddler, and finding that he was a part of the Fox sisters' process of developing the alphabet and communication. So there was a lot of establishing of ways and methodologies to communicate, or trying to discover how this works. So as society was progressing, that comfort from communication or finding was expanding, and it was moving alongside of spirit communication. It is moving alongside in saying is, let's develop the philosophy. What also was happening was investigation. Investigation for those that were wondering, how does this work? And even we are in 2026, that scrutiny of investigation still runs. How does this work? How do mediums and psychics communicate and do what they do? That investigation is still there, even though it has been documented and spoke about, but that curiosity within an individual still continues. So in that middle era was establishing the testing, establishing the scientific precepts, establishing the conduit and exploration of studies. And there have been numerous mediums that stepped forward to be scrutinized, tested in a lab, went into the experiments of establishing that this is significant, this happens. There is a shift in the brain chemistry, there is a shift in our auric field, and there are a lot of interesting things happen when you're doing the part of mediumship. And the exploration just continued, but at the same time, Emma Hardinge Britton is one of the profound names through that time period. Some of the European, British mediums are pretty leading in aspects of allowing themselves to be studied and scrutinized, because they believed in what they did was happening and it was real, and they consistently produced the outcome. So there has been a lot of that. So the core philosophies started developing that. I also know from my base of knowledge that was also the time where there was a big movement of oratory skills where the mediums would set up foot on the podium like such and move the people into their own journey with their own grief, healing, and receiving what they needed to receive. And I have sat in some of the auditoriums in our eastern belt of the United States, and I can feel the presence of what was going on in those places. I could feel the energy. I could feel the build-up. Now, my backdrop is from a Methodist Christian background, but there was a lot of prayer and praise in my home. So I could just identify what spirit energy feels like when it builds up. And I could really say in this room and rooms like this, the auditorium, the places where people have gathered for spirit communication, and that yearning for healing and working through their grief always rises with volume. It raises the energy, and you could feel it. When we are plugged in into the source, you would know when the wattage is right, the light's going to be just fine. So part of that understanding is how that worked in that middle era was to just establish and strengthen from the first part of grief and bring it into the perspective of the philosophy of it is there. So that came into that part. Now, once again, in the third era was more wars. There are more chaos where people are going to do what they need to do, and once again, no culture, no belief system, no background was sparred. Everybody becomes a part of it. And what I'm wanting to bring in my subtlety is the world is feeling a shift and a movement in today's time. So this dialogue is not about fear or expanding on fear, but this is saying is we perhaps are moving into another era where it is very important. So the third era, as I was speaking just a moment ago, was once again bringing the confusion, bringing the desire to understand. But now that we had an established understanding of our own mechanics of our energy bodies or the communication and the desire to communicate with the other side, the healing has never been far from all this. Healing has always been the backdrop of no matter what the communication is. And even if it's a psychic communication, intuitive communication, the healing runs in the undertone of that work. Because the movement is what is next, what's going on next. So in today's time, I feel over the years, I want to say since 1800s and up until this time, I feel there is a lot of information is available, scientifically documented through studies, through experiments, through just sitting in the presence in your own energy. We all feel the information. So there's a lot of information is there. But I feel as though we are overwhelmed with the information at the same time, while we have this beautiful information accessible to us. But sometimes we get overwhelmed with it. And it aligns with the thought, the information is so easily accessible, any information has the probability of overwhelming us. So we are living in a very sensory stimulated environment of too much information. What I'm recognizing from my two shoes and then relating in some capacity is the integration of the information is what this era is calling for. What you know, how can you use it to your benefit? What you know about your own mechanics of your own spirit or your own compass, how does that point you in the direction that's best suited for you? So that integration is, I feel, is going to be our new era's exploration through spiritualism or any spiritual practices for that matter. Because we know a lot of things, but how do we keep perspective? How do we keep that perspective to slow down and listen? So you have been listening to me for approximately 10-15 minutes. How often your brain has escaped this conversation? It's simple, right? It just happens. It's involuntary. It is happening to some of us. But at the same time, the idea is that's how the integration escapes our reality when we're trying to sort things out. So at this point, I feel we all know healing is possible. We all know spirit communication is possible. We know connecting with our guides and angels and our support system on the other side is very real and possible. How do we incorporate? And my part is try it, sit with it, be your own experiment. And unless you put yourself through your own version of experiment, it will not create any relevant sense of reality. It's always going to be somebody else's perspective. So when we think in terms of integration, I would also like to remind all of us to try to be able to hold your own space rather than expecting somebody else to hold it for you. Understand that term of holding space. Maintain your own sanctuary. Do your inner combing. Release things that are not working out. Because in a glass full of water, you cannot add more water. And I'm being reminded of my own thought process a couple of years ago. To bring something new in my life, I will have to release something that is redundantly sitting, not serving a purpose. So undoing is a part of doing at the same time. It's all working back to back. So releasing something that is not working out is a part of integration. Understanding to release that, it's done. And you're just sitting with it, and that's just how sometimes we are. I'm just the same as you are. But my recognition in today's time period, this time, over time, and even if we go before 1800s, every time the big global movement has occurred, it has only allowed the opportunity for us all to expand. I want to say each and every one of us in this time is really vibrating on a very higher index of energy. And that integration is very necessary because if you have ever blended anything in a blender with a loose lid, you get the point? So you understand from that perspective, management is very important. Integration is very important. Be kind to yourself. And that is very real. So as I come into the matter of closing this conversation, I want everybody to understand we all have a journey. We all have things to do and tasks to accomplish. We have to keep the sanity while we are trying to act like we have sanity. So maintaining that is important. But at the same time, spiritualism has been that backdrop because it doesn't really separate anybody. So I'm going to leave you one of my same thought. When did spiritualism started? I want you to philosophize it in your own version of it. I believe it started when there was first life lost. Because that grief has that long of a journey whenever it happened. That grief, that loss has that journey. And that consciousness in understanding that grief has been going on for so long. So it's not about the spiritualism. I'm saying the part of the loss and grief is what propels us as a religion, philosophy, and science to provide support to those that seek us. So know yourself, understand how you can integrate your own cultivated energy within yourself. How will you allow it to continue to expand you in unexplainable ways? So don't limit yourself saying this is fine. And that is okay, but it's okay for a small time. Our purpose of our soul's journey is to expand, and it continues to expand time after time without any time continuum. So why limit in this time period? So whatever you're feeling is also a sign of expansion within you. So be true and honoring of that. So take this word with you, integration. How am I integrating my spiritual growth in my present day reality? And I feel like it will give you some comfort and composure, and it'll also give you a sense of integrity within your own journey. Thank you.